So let's talk about another interesting subject, quite complex, which is digital sovereignty. Okay. So the digital sovereignty is basically the ability of controlling the digital independence of an organization, starting from a country down to a company, and the possibility of deciding how to manage the digital contents. Today we are in a digital world, so all contents are digital. And this without any dependency from a single company that decides about digital contents. So I brought a special tool here. This is an authentic Sicilian coppola, which is, I have to introduce the GAFAM concept here, because imagine that the CIO of the 5 companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, all wearing a Sicilian coppola and telling you, I know where you live, and I know what you do, and I'll control you. And I can tell you that if you tell this with a Sicilian coppola around Palermo, the other guy would be scared. And the funny thing is that they changed name, probably because they said GAFAM is already known, but ironically, now they are Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft. You know, in Italy, when we want to give something to eat to a boy, we pick the thing to eat and we tell him, which is eat me. So now from GAFAM, which was not so clear, they went to which is extremely clear. We want to eat you. So this is their concept. And just to give you an idea of what these companies knows about us, this it's clear, but it's not the entire table. The entire table doesn't fit in a slide, so I had to put it this way. And this is what these companies knows about us. Not nice, but unfortunately true. And what is even worse, I don't know how familiar you are with our genome. Each one of us carries his own genome. It's part of our body. And some human genes had names that Excel could not handle. It was transformed. The program is so smart that was converting gene names into month names. Because there was a gene name that was MAR, M-A-R, and Excel thought it was a month. So it was correcting the genome names into dates. LibreOffice, by the way, Calc, has never done this, because Calc is smart enough to understand that it's not a number. So instead of Excel correcting a bug, the scientific community had to change the genome names. And I personally feel offended by the fact that a company forced the scientific community to change the genome names because the software cannot be updated or upgraded or whatever you call it to manage that names. I think this is, in my opinion, is unbelievable. And the scientific community should have just stood up against Microsoft and say, you have to correct that because we cannot change genome names. But they had to change them. And this is the result of this. This is a network of the lobbyists of the main companies, that is Google, Microsoft, Apple. In Brussels, there are more lobbyists than members of parliament. On average, each member of parliament has 2 lobbyists, which is incredible. And all this has been, not specifically this, but this kind of economic structure has been studied by this lady. She's a professor at Princeton University in the United States. With this book is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She has analyzed how, from a simple search engine, these companies have been able to transform our data, our search, into money. Because of course, you do a search, but then if you add some traits, the next round of searches will have additional information. And up at the end, if you do searches on a regular basis, each search will add information about who is searching. So you will have a profile. And on top of this, there will be another development, which is the one that goes outside the search engine. So they share data with the other companies basically to make a profile of us and to control us. And this is unfortunate and should be solved. We should get back our data. We should get our data and manage our data, because otherwise, at the end, the economic life, in a sense, it's managed or regulated by companies that have nothing to do with our democratic choices. So the state of play, unfortunately, is that the politicians, for a number of reasons, including that they have all those lobbyists around them, see these companies as part of the overall economy. So in a sense, they accept what these companies are doing. And although there are laws like GDPR or other laws that should forbid some of the actions, at the end they not help but try to provide them a solution. If you look at what has happened with there has been a recent sentence by the European GDPR, European Privacy Manager, that said basically that using Windows Microsoft 365 is illegal, because the data are transferred in a way that cannot be controlled by the user. But instead of saying this is happening because there is a structure and a strategy behind, they said, so the company should solve it by doing this and that, because they think that they cannot do without Microsoft, which I personally think is not true at all. We are producing a huge amount of data. And the data, from being a pure data, now is a product. And as we produce data, we are products. Next year, this is analyst, is not me inventing numbers with a lot of zeros. We will generate 175 zettabytes of data. You can count the number of zeros, it's incredible. So data centers and the public cloud will store, basically will share 50% each of these data. And 92% of all these data will be stored in servers owned by US-based tech companies, which have a clear commercial objectives. I'm not against their commercial objectives, but let's say that my privacy has something against those commercial objectives. And if you are asking yourself how they gather the data, this is, of course, a design, but it's reproducing the sensors that you can normally find in a European or an American, North American city around you. We basically are in the middle of sensors. There are Wi-Fi, mobile phones, mobile towers, everything is a sensor and can share data. Even if in some cases you don't realize or you are not totally aware of that. And the number of interactions that we have, and each interaction is data. This is again an IDC study. In 2025, we are estimated to produce around 5,000 interactions per day, which is many per hour, per minute. And even if we don't realize that we have this interaction, these are true. And this is an old, not very old, but a slightly old advertising in the States. Axiom is a company owned by Oracle. So these companies sell data. Axiom provides up to 3,000 attributes and scores of 700 million people in the US, Europe, and other regions. The green one. The red one is even more frightening. Oracle sorts people into thousands of categories and provides more than 30,000 attributes on 2 billion consumer profiles. Just to give you a data which is shared by all of us, in our skeleton we have less than 300 bones. So they collect 30,000 data for each one of us. It means that for each piece of skeleton they have 1,000 information. Of course, just as an example, of course but probably they know the size and the weight of my small fingernail. Because if you try to be creative, 30,000 data about a person, it's way more than the person can imagine. So what we should do? We should, of course, be able to decide. I mean, if you're happy to share all your data, it's up to you. I think no problem in sharing some of my data, but for instance, I would not like to share my healthcare data. If you share my mobile phones, it's not a big issue. My email is not a big issue. My personal address may start to be an issue. I live with other people. My personal healthcare data would be a big issue for me. So that is something that we should, with the help of government, we should start to regain control of. Is a problem. I think is a problem. This is my opinion, of course, but I think is shared by many people. A large percentage of European government rely on proprietary software for desktop productivity and many other applications. And the problem is that some of these companies, the company that provide this software, have agreements with some governments to provide the data that they collect. It's not specified which data and what they collect. For instance, is the CIA or the National Security Agency in the state ask one of these companies to give them the data about European citizens, they have to. So if they have data about Italo Vignoli, who is me, they will give Italo Vignoli data to the American government. And I start to be really unhappy about that. So the problem is that we don't know which data. There are sentences like Schrems 2 that say that this shouldn't happen in Europe, but unfortunately the problem is that it happens. Which is the difference if governments start to use open source software? So open source software is different in one specific thing. Normally, open source projects do not have commercial objectives as strong as proprietary software. Companies in the proprietary environment have to provide quarterly data to analysts, have to provide data on a regular basis to authorities, and therefore they have to increase their turnover almost on a regular basis. If they have a bad quarter, they have to explain why. So the fact is that this creates commercial objectives that usually are not in line with the objective of the user of their products. Open source software, and I'm not telling you that it's 100% of open source software, but the majority of open source software, and especially open source software based on copyleft licenses, like LibreOffice. So licenses that force everyone to contribute back to the software, which means that this reduces the potential effect of commercial objectives connected to this kind of software, protects the user with transparency. You can look into open source software, and if open source software behaves in the wrong way, you can understand it. You understand where they pick up your information and if they share the information. And usually you have an answer. If the question comes, 2 days ago, a user wrote us, I've made a search on my file and I found that inside one of the LibreOffice file, there is a string saying LibreOffice 24.2 and a number followed by a number of digits. Is that information about me? No. That is part of the standard, so is described. Not the string of digits, but the fact that an ODF file has to contain the name of the software that has produced the file. And then there is a string of numbers that tells the software when that file has been accessed by, if it was on a computer or somewhere. It's not something that we are sharing with others. It's necessary for the software to provide intelligent information the next time that you open that same file. There is the version of the ODF file, there is the day of the creation of the software, and the day that the file was opened last time. But what we do in addition of this, LibreOffice now allows the users to decide not to store this information. Of course, the file will store the information requested by the standard, because otherwise the document would not be standard, but can hide or not store the information about opening, closing the software, the name of the author, and so on and so forth. This, you don't even know if a Microsoft Office file will allow you to do this or not, simply because it's not published, it's not part of the standard, and the software is closed, and therefore you cannot see the source code. So what would change by switching to open source? I think it's a consequence. Open source will allow the user or the organization to regain full control of the data. Of course, if they want to share the information, they can do that. But if they want to protect the information, the software will allow them to protect the information. No one else than the organization will decide about the sharing of data. It's not a third party or a company that decides that the data have to be shared. So unfortunately, seems a no-brainer. And as I said, politicians, they are not technologists, so in many cases they are influenced by other people. Think that you cannot live without Microsoft. You cannot live without Oracle. You cannot live without these companies. And therefore, and I'm not accusing them of doing something wrong, because this is what probably more than 90% of people think. And in some cases, and this is strange but real, I'm 70 years old, I'm not a technologist. When people look at my desktop, the first reaction of these people is, oh, you are using a funny version of Windows. The reality is that I use a normal version of Linux on my desktop. So the next sentence is, of course, it's not a strange version of Windows, it's a normal version of Linux. Oh, you're so old and you can use Linux. Thank you for the so old. Yes, I can use Linux. I just need one neuron connected to my two ends to use Linux. So it's up to you. If you own that neuron, you can use Linux. If you don't own that neuron, sorry, you have to stick with Windows. So politicians do not understand technology normally. They are influenced. So they don't see free open source software as a potential answer. They don't say, okay, we have understood that we may have issues with this big tech. So what could be the alternative? Open source. Okay, let's have a look at open source. When you mention open source, in some cases they will say, no, open source is not going to work anyway. So this is unfortunately the point where we have to be more effective in talking to politicians and to explain that the software is, in many, many cases, is very similar, that today, for many services, they are already using open source software. The cloud infrastructure is mostly based on open source software. Even Microsoft has admitted that Azure has over 50% of Linux servers. And if they say that it has over 50%, I think that it has over 80% of Linux servers, because of course the 50% is political. I would give the same answer if I was a Microsoft employee, of course. So interoperability is key, and interoperability is something that we care a lot about, because it's part of the open source. We work together. We do not invent things. So we want to do things together that can help us with the least effort to build better software. So we have a format, which is ODF, that is a format for perfect or almost perfect. Perfect will never exist, let's say. But it's a format that is for interoperability. It can be improved, it can be extended. There are bugs that have to be solved. I'm saying this because Regina otherwise looks at me in a bad way. She's an ODF specialist, and I have to respect her incredible professionalism on ODF, and Svante as well, who is close to Regina. They are our ODF gurus. But governments should be platform independent, so they should choose formats which are not created by one single company, but are created by a neutral organization, someone that has created the format because it was necessary for the user. No, it was not necessary for the commercial strategies of the company. So what has happened, because the next question from some of you could be, but Office OpenXML is a standard. Yes, it was a standard. It has probably been a standard for a couple of days around 2008, when the first version of the format was, the first description of the format was given to ISO. Then after a few days, that description was made obsolete by the next version that was basically never, or almost never, communicated to ISO. So you have tweaked standard that are, looks like standard, but are not like standard, because let's provide a simple description. If I use a software, any software, and I create a standard document, that document should be exactly the same if I create it from a Linux PC, a Windows PC, a Mac PC, a smartphone, a tablet, or whatever any other device can create that file. So the file, when opened, not as a user, but as a technical person, so when opened in terms of looking into the components of the file, those components are probably, they will never be 100% similar, but let's say that they should be at least 90% the same. So only minor details should change. Not that you save a document which is a certain length of XML lines, and after a week is 10 times as much, which is what happens with files created by Microsoft Office. So we have tried to create projects to improve this. We cannot read documents. But in front of us, we had a company, a nice company, creating manuals which are how to lock in your clients. This is a Microsoft manual, January 2004. It has disappeared the day after I mentioned that document in a, it's true, unfortunately true. I mentioned that document at FOSDEM. I still have copies of that document. So if you want a copy of that document, I can send you that nice document by email. It's the original from Microsoft. You can look at the PDF, it's the original from Microsoft. So I could spend days speaking about transitional and strict, but I think I have to go short. ODF was born, as I said this morning, for the next 50 years, because it's looking forward. Office OpenXML has been created to maintain the last 50 years, because they don't want us to go forward. What we can do, complexity is a strategy. You make the format complex so that only people using your software can be 100% sure that they can open it. The problem is that people is not asking questions about how secure they are. Let's say that a Kaspersky search 2019-2020, I think, found that 75% of all malware is carried by Microsoft Office documents. So people should start asking themselves some questions. The problem is that what is at stake, and this is a sentence from Shoshana, is the human expectation of sovereignty over your own life and authorship of one's own experience. We all produce contents. Let those contents be ours instead of sharing them with a software company. Thank you.